The morning shift at Kepler 44-B recruitment station began like any other morning for the past 3 years since the Galactic Coalition opened its doors to mercenaries from across known space. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species crowded the massive processing hall with its vaulted ceilings that stretched high enough to accommodate even the tallest Vrex warriors the air recyclers worked overtime to manage. The mixture of atmospheres required by different species, while holographic displays flickered with assignment postings and pay grades. Among the crowd stood Marcus Cheney, wore a flight jacket that had seen better days with patches covering burns and tears from what might have been a dozen different encounters. His plasma rifle hung from a standard issue strap across his shoulder and looked like something purchased from a military surplus store rather than custom-fitted weaponry. Everything about him screamed ordinary. The Vrex administrator at Processing Station 7 barely glanced up when Marcus approached. The massive reptilian being stood nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that gleamed like burnished bronze under the station's harsh lighting. Name and planet of origin, the Vrex said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Marcus Chen from Earth. Marcus replied quietly. The administrator's clawed fingers moved across a holographic interface without enthusiasm. Combat experience: 5 years as a fighter, pilot and ground infantry references, none available. The Vrex finally looked at Marcus with eyes that held the bored contempt of someone who had processed 10,000 applicants exactly like this one. You humans always show up late to every conflict, the administrator said, while stamping Marcus's documents with a glowing seal. The war has been going on for 15 years, and your species only joined the coalition 3 years ago, Marcus said. Nothing Delta Squadron. The Vrex continued mining. Protection detail on the frontier stations in your pay grade is minimum scale since you have no verified combat record with Coalition forces. A Quellan officer with 6 arms and iridescent skin that shifted through colors like oil on water appeared to escort Marcus to the barracks level. The Quellan's name was impossible for human vocal cords to pronounce, so Marcus simply followed in silence. They descended through the station on transport platforms that hummed with anti-gravity fields. Other recruits gave Marcus curious looks. A human was still a relative novelty in these sectors, where most mercenaries came from species that had been fighting the Krell for generations. The Barracks 4 Delta Squadron occupied a section of the station that clearly received the least maintenance. Exposed conduits ran along the ceiling, and several wall panels showed scorch marks from some past malfunction that no one had bothered to repair. Inside the common area, a dozen beings from various species stood around tables or sat on furniture designed for multiple body types. Conversation stopped when Marcus entered. A Vrex warrior, even larger than the processing administrator, stepped forward. His scales bore the white scars of countless battles, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a veteran who had survived through skill rather than luck. I am Throck, he said, commander of Delta Squadron, and you must be the new human Marcus Chen. Marcus said while extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Threk looked at the offered hand for a moment before reaching out with his own massive cloth. Grip was careful and measured, as if the Vrex was aware his strength could easily crush human bones. We have 17 members currently, Throck explained while releasing Marcus's hand. Our assignment is protection of mining operations in the frontier sectors, and the work is not glamorous, but it pays regularly. A being that looked like a collection of floating crystalline shards, arranged in a vaguely humanoid shape, drifted closer. The shard's voice came from vibrations in the air itself, rather than from any visible mouth. Another soft-worlder. The shard said, "Tell me, human, do your people actually think they can make a difference in a war that was already decided before you even achieved faster-than-light travel?" Several other squadron members made sounds that Marcus recognized as laughter across various species. I am here to help however I can, Marcus said simply. How noble, Quellan with deep purple skin said from across the room. The human wants to help, and perhaps after we finish protecting our shipments for another decade, the war will be over, and you can tell your grandchildren about your brave service in the rear guard. More laughter. Marcus absorbed it all with the patience of someone who had heard variations of the same mockery before. Throck raised one clawed hand, and the laughter died down enough. The commander said, Chen may be new and unproven, but he is now part of Delta Squadron, and you will treat him as such. The statement carried authority, but Marcus could see it was a formality. Throck's tone suggested he did not actually expect much from the human either. A Vrex female named Kessa showed Marcus to his assigned quarters. The room was barely large enough for a human-sized bunk with a small storage locker and a cleaning station. Previous occupant had left behind scratches on the walls and a faint smell that the recyclers had not quite eliminated. Supply office is on deck 9. Kessa said, "You will need to request armor fitted for your species, and the quartermaster is a Quellan named Rax, who does not like humans, but try not to take it personally since he does not like anyone." He sat on the bunk and felt the thin mattress compress under his weight. The metal frame creaked ominously. He had expected this. Humanity's late entry into the Galactic Coalition meant humans carried a burden of proof that other species did not. Earth had been focused on internal conflicts and slower-than-light colonization. When the Krell began their conquest of the outer sectors, by the time humanity developed FTL technology and made contact with the Galactic Coalition, the war had already claimed billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. The other species saw humans as fortunate latecomers who had avoided the worst of the suffering. Marcus unpacked his few belongings with methodical care, a spare uniform, and some personal items that meant nothing to anyone but him, and a small data chip that he immediately hid in a concealed pocket of his jacket. The chip contained the truth, but truth was a luxury he could not afford right now. The supply office racks. The Quellan quartermaster looked at Marcus with open disdain. "Human," Rax said while his multiple arms gestured at shelves of equipment. "Your species has such fragile bodies and you need special accommodations for everything. I just need standard armor in my size." Marcus said. Rax pulled out a chest plate that looked like it had been damaged in combat, then poorly repaired. "This is what I have available for humans." The quartermaster said, "The good armor goes to species who have actually proven themselves in battle." Marcus examined the armor, though. Structural integrity was compromised in at least 3 places, and the power cells were outdated models that would drain quickly under sustained fire. "This will be fine," Marcus said. Rax's expression suggested surprise that the human had not complained back. In the barracks that evening, Marcus sat alone in the common area while running diagnostics on his plasma rifle. The other squadron members clustered in their own groups. Was reviewing tactical displays with Kessa and 2 other Verks, while the Quellan members shared a meal that looked like live insects swimming in luminescent fluid. The Shard navigator hovered near a window, staring out at the stars. Marcus did not mind the isolation. He had joined Delta Squadron knowing exactly what to expect. The mockery and the outdated equipment and the assignments that kept him far from anything important. It was better this way, better to be underestimated and overlooked, better to seem like just another fighter among thousands, because if anyone discovered who he really was, the questions would begin. Questions about how he survived when he was supposed to be dead, questions about why he was here instead of accepting the retirement. Humanity had offered questions about what he was running from, or perhaps what he was running toward. Marcus finished his diagnostics and set the rifle aside. Tomorrow, Delta Squadron would ship out to their assigned sector. Tomorrow, the routine would begin, and Marcus would do what he had done for the past 6 months since he falsified his identity and enlisted under a dead man's name. He would stay quiet and do his job and hope that being unremarkable was enough to let him keep fighting in the only way he knew how. The mining station designated as Outpost Xerxes 9 floated in the asteroid belt. Like a mechanical barnacle clinging to a rock 3 kilometers across, Delta Squadron had been stationed here for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of mind-numbing routine that involved monitoring sensor grids and escorting our transports through mapped routes that never changed. Marcus stood his watch in the communications bay of their Corvette while listening to the endless chatter between mining crews. The voices spoke in a dozen languages about equipment malfunctions and yield rates and shift rotation. Skessa sat at the pilot station running yet another diagnostic on the ship's weapon systems. "I do not understand how your species tolerates boredom," she said without looking up from her displays. "Rex warriors are bred for combat, and these protection details make me feel like my skills are wasting away. Someone has to protect the miners." Marcus said, "Yes, but why does it have to be us?" Kessa's tail swished with irritation. "Throck says we have been with Delta Squadron for 4 years, and in that time we have engaged in actual combat exactly 3 times. Before Marcus could respond, the sensor alarm shrieked, the sound cut through the quiet of the ship like a blade. Marcus's hands moved across his console while his eyes scanned the data, flooding his screen's multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. He said his voice remained calm, even as his heartbeat accelerated. Distance 200,000 kilometers and closing fast. Kessa was already signaling the other 2 corvettes and their small flotilla, all ships to battle stations. She commanded Throck. "This is Kessa, and we have incoming." The commander's voice came through the speakers immediately. "I see them," Throck said. "By the ancestors, there are too many." Marcus counted the contacts as they resolved on his sensors. 15. Krell attacked ships, 3 heavy cruisers, and 1 carrier that was already launching fighter craft like angry insects from a disturbed nest of Krell ships moved with the precise coordination that came from their hive mind connection. Each vessel was a living thing grown rather than built with organic hull plating that could regenerate damage and weapons that fired concentrated streams of bioplasma. "This is 3 times the force that intelligence predicted for this sector," Throck said over the squadron channel. "They must have detected the rare earth deposits that mining surveys found last week." The mining station's defensive platforms activated, turrets swiveled toward the approaching threat while energy shields flickered to life around critical structures, but everyone in Delta Squadron knew the truth. Outpost Xerxes 9 was a low-priority installation. Defenses were designed to repel raiders and pirates, not a full Krell battle group. "All ships form defensive perimeter around the station," Throck ordered, "and someone get a distress call too." Coalition command immediately. Marcus was already composing the emergency transmission hiss. Fingers flew across the communication console, while part of his mind calculated response times. The nearest Coalition fleet was 6 hours away at maximum burns. 6 hours might as well be 6 years. Krell would reduce the station to debris in less than 1. The first wave of Krell fighters swept toward the defensive perimeter. Delta Squadron's 3 corvettes opened fire. Plasma bolts and missile trails crisscrossed the void between the asteroid and the approaching enemy. Marcus watched his tactical display while filtering data through multiple analysis protocols. The Krell formation looked standard at first glance. Heavy cruisers forming a protective triangle around the carrier, while fighters screened the advance and smaller attack ships probed for weaknesses in the station's defenses, but something nagged at Marcus's awareness, a pattern that did not quite fit. "Kessa, take us 30 degrees starboard," Marcus said. "There is a gap forming in the fighter screen." The Vrex pilot complied without question. Combat had a way of stripping away prejudice there. Corvette rolled through the maneuver while its weapons continued their steady rhythm of fire. Explosion bloomed where 3 Krell fighters had been direct hit from the station's main defensive cannon, but for every enemy destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "We cannot hold this position." Throke's voice held frustration rather than fear. "All ships prepare for emergency evacuation of station. Personnel and mining crews to evacuate immediately." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 1,500 people worked on Outpost Xerxes 9 Delta. Squadron's 3 corvettes could carry maybe 200 in an emergency. Rest would be left behind when the Krell breached the station's hull. Marcus, his eyes had not left his tactical display numbers, and trajectories flowed across his vision while his mind processed attack patterns and fleet compositions. Krell were following a standard assault doctrine, overwhelming force applied with mechanical precision, but mechanical precision created predictable patterns. Predictable patterns created opportunities. "Commander Throck," Marcus said while his voice remained measured, "I see a potential counterstrike option, Chen. This is not the time for suggestions from untested recruits." Throck snapped, "We need to focus on evacuation." Marcus almost let it go, almost accepted the dismissal and returned to his assigned duties, but his eyes kept tracking the gap. He had noticed the flaw in the Krell formation that appeared for exactly 4.7 seconds during each attack. Rotation, a flaw that no one else seemed to see. "The Krell point defense grid has a gap," Marcus said. His voice was quiet but carried across the command channel. "If we coordinate a strike during their weapon cycling sequence, we could penetrate their formation and disable the carrier's fighter launch bay." "Impossible," Throck said. "Their point defense coverage is overlapping and redundant, and no ship could survive the crossing, not impossible. Marcus replied, difficult, but not impossible, and if we time it correctly, Chen, I do not have time for this. Throck interrupted, return to your station and help coordinate the evacuation. Marcus took a breath. He had hoped to avoid this moment, hoped to remain unremarkable and anonymous for at least a few more months. But 1,500 lives hung in the balance, Commander. My combat designation is Reaper 7. Marcus said into the sudden silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one spoke. Even the sounds of battle seemed to fade into background noise. Say that again? Throke's voice had changed. Gone was the frustrated impatience in its place was something that sounded like Shock Reaper 7. Marcus repeated, and I am telling you, there is a way to win this engagement. Kessa's hands had frozen on her controls. She turned to stare at Marcus with eyes that reflected disbelief. The Repersevan died at Barnard Star, she said. Official casualty reports confirmed it. Official reports are not always accurate. Marcus Saithrak's face appeared on the communications screen. Breck's commander's expression had transformed from dismissal to something approaching awe. Prove it. Throck demanded submit to biometric verification immediately. Marcus placed his hand on the security scanner at his console. The system analyzed his genetic markers and neural patterns while comparing them against military databases. The verification process took 15 seconds. 15 seconds during which the battle raged around them and Krell forces pushed closer to the station. The scanner's light turned green. Biometric match confirmed. The ship's computer announced in its neutral synthetic voice. Genetic and neural patterns consistent with Reaper program designate 7 by all the gods of all the homeworlds. Kessa whispered. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares, but kept his attention on the tactical display. Commander, we have approximately 90 seconds before the Krell are in position to begin bombardment of the station. Marcus said, do I have tactical command? Throke's hesitation lasted only a moment. Yes. The commander said, all squadron vessels, this is Throck, and tactical command is transferred to Chen immediately and without question. Marcus's awareness expanded. The modifications that humanity had made to his neural structure came online with a sensation like cold water flooding through his brain suddenly. The battle was not chaos. It was mathematics and geometry and probability. It was patterns within patterns. It was something he could see with perfect clarity. All ships listen carefully. Marcus said while his voice remained calm despite the fire that now burned through his enhanced nervous system. I am going to tell you exactly how we are going to win this fight. The moment Marcus Chen said the words Reaper 7 into the open command channel, every member of Delta Squadron who heard it experienced the same visceral reaction, disbelief, followed by shock, followed by a desperate need to verify that what they heard was real. The Reaper program was not classified information. Every military academy in the Galactic Coalition taught the history of humanity's late but devastating entry into the war effort. A species that fought against the Krell knew. The Stories 12 enhanced human soldiers who had turned the tide of battles that should have been unwinnable defeats could feel the weight of their attention even as his enhanced mind worked through the tactical calculations needed to save Outpost Xerxes 9. Impossible. Someone said over the squadron channel. Marcus recognized the voice as belonging to Rax, the Quellan quartermaster, who had given him the damaged armor. Reaper 7 died 3 years ago at Barnard Star. The official casualty report was filed by Coalition High Command. Another voice added, I read the after-action reports in training, and Reaper 7 held the choke point at the station for 16 hours against an entire Krell war fleet. 16 hours. Kessa breathed beside Marcus. Her hands still rested on the pilot controls, but her eyes were locked on him. 2 million civilians evacuated because one human refused to retreat. Marcus had not thought about Barnard Star in months. He had trained himself not to remember those 16 hours, the screaming alarms, and the bodies of his fellow soldiers, and the moment when his ammunition finally ran out, and he prepared for the end that never came. Focus on the present, Marcus said while his voice cut through the chatter. We can discuss history after we survive the next 10 minutes, but how did you survive? Throck demanded. The Vrex commander's face on the communication screen showed confusion alongside the awe. The reports said the station was completely destroyed and there were no survivors from the defense force. I had help. Marcus said he offered no other explanation. The truth was more complicated than he cared to discuss during active combat. Civilian freighter captain who ignored orders to evacuate a risky transfer through hard vacuum months of recovery in an unmarked medical facility. Finally, a quiet conversation with human military leadership about how sometimes dead heroes were more useful than living ones. The biometric scan confirmed his identity. Kessa said she seemed to be speaking more to herself than to anyone else. The Reaper program modifications leave distinctive neural patterns that cannot be faked. Then we have a legend fighting alongside us. Someone said over the channel Marcus could not identify the speaker. No. Marcus said firmly, "You have a soldier who sees tactical patterns more clearly than most, and right now we need to use that advantage before the Krell kill everyone on this station." The reminder of their immediate crisis seemed to cut through. "The shock, what do you need from us?" Throck asked. The commander's tone had completely changed. Gone was the dismissive attitude toward the unremarkable. Human recruit in its place was the deference usually reserved for superior officers. "First I need you two stop thinking of me as Reaper 7? Marcus said while his fingers danced across his console. "That designation belongs to a program that no longer exists, and I'm just another member of Delta Squadron who happens to have useful modifications." "Useful modifications," Kessa repeated her laugh held a note of hysteria. The Reaper program cost humanity more resources than most species spend on entire war efforts, and only 12 soldiers were ever created because the process was so expensive and dangerous. Marcus knew the numbers each. Reaper had required 5 years of intensive modification neural rewiring that allowed direct interface with computer systems cognitive enhancements that processed tactical data at speeds that seemed supernatural, reflex augmentation that brought human reaction times down to microseconds, and physical modifications that allowed them to survive injuries that would kill normal humans. 7 of the original 12 had died during the war's critical turning point, the liberation of Proxima, where Reaper units had been deployed to break the Krell siege of humanity's largest colony. World Marcus had been there, had watched friends and fellow Reapers fall while holding positions that should have required entire battalions to defend the victory. Proxima had saved millions of lives, but the cost had been devastating. After Proxima, the program was dissolved. Marcus said while studying the Krell attack patterns on his display. The 5 surviving Reapers were given medical treatment and new identities and generous pensions. "Then why are you here?" Throck asked. "Why falsify your records and enlist as a common mercenary when you could be living in comfort on Earth?" Marcus watched another wave of Krell fighters sweep past the station's defensive perimeter. An explosion marked where one of the station's turrets had been destroyed. 1,500 people still inside that station. 1,500 lives depending on decisions made in the next few minutes, because the war is not over. Marcus said simply, "And I am a soldier." The statement hung in the air for a moment. "The modifications," Kessa said slowly, "they allow you to interface directly with ship systems." "Yes," Marcus confirmed, "I can process sensor data and weapons targeting and navigation calculations simultaneously in my reaction. Time is approximately 0.003 seconds. That is faster than our computer targeting systems." Someone said with undisguised awe, "That is why the Reapers were effective." Marcus said, "We could adapt to changing battlefield conditions faster than any enemy force could counter, and the Krell hive mind gives them coordination, but it also makes them predictable." He pulled up the tactical display and highlighted the gap he had identified in the Krell formation there. Marcus said, while transmitting the data to all 3 squadron vessels. Every 4.7 seconds during their attack rotation, the point defense coverage from the heavy cruisers creates a gap exactly here. The other pilots studied the transmission. "I do not see it." Kessa admitted, "The coverage looks complete to me." "It is not." Marcus said with absolute certainty, "The firing arcs overlap by 97%. But there is a 3% gap that cycles through this position, and if we time our approach correctly, we can punch through, even if you are right," Throck said slowly. "Even if there is a gap, the carrier's fighter launch bay is protected by layers of organic armor that can regenerate damage. Not if we hit it with concentrated fire at the structural weak point," Marcus countered. He highlighted another section of the Krell carrier. "Here where the launch bay meets the main hull, and the organic material is thinner because it needs Flexibility for the launch mechanisms. How can you possibly know that? Rax demanded. I have fought the Krell. For 5 years, Marcus said. I have studied their ship designs and their tactics and their weaknesses, and that knowledge is what the Reaper program trained me to use. Throck was silent for several seconds. Marcus could almost see the commander weighing the options trust. The human who had been with Delta Squadron for only 2 weeks, or proceed with the evacuation that would save maybe 200 lives while condemning over 1,000 to death. You are wrong, Throck said finally. If this gap does not exist, or if our timing is off by even a fraction of a second, we will lose all 3 ships and everyone aboard them. I am not wrong. Marcus said he spoke without arrogance, just simple certainty, Commander. I have never been wrong about tactical analysis, and that is not pride speaking, but statistical fact verified over hundreds of combat engagements. Another explosion rocked the station, the main defensive cannon fell silent, the Krell were systematically eliminating the station's ability to fight back. Time is running out. Marcus said. Quiet. Lithrak looked at something off-screen. Then back at Marcus. The Vrex commander's expression showed the weight of command. The burden of making decisions that determined who lived and who died. Do it. Throck said. All ships follow. Reaper 7's instructions exactly in May. Whatever gods you believe in, watch over us. Marcus felt something release in his chest. Relief exactly, but a sense of rightness. This was what he had been created for. This was why he could not walk away from the war, even when given the chance. All ships. This is Chen, he said into the command channel. I am transmitting attack vectors now, and execute on my mark in 3 minutes. His hands moved across the console, while his enhanced mind calculated trajectories and timing sequences. The other pilots would follow. His instructions, they had no choice if they wanted to survive, but Marcus knew that after today, nothing would be the same. The secret he had kept for 6 months was now exposed. The anonymity he had sought was gone, and 1,500 people were counting on the legend of Reaper 7 to be more than just a story told in military academies. Marcus's enhanced consciousness expanded to encompass all 3 corvettes. Simultaneously, through the direct neural interface, he could feel the ships as extensions of his own body. Every sensor array became another set of eyes. Every weapon system became another limb. Every engine thruster became muscles responding to his will. This was what the Reaper program had created, not just soldiers, but living tactical computers who could wage war with a precision that seemed superhuman, because in many ways it was all ships. Begin acceleration on Vector Alpha 7. Marcus said while his voice remained calm despite the torrent of data flooding through his modified brain. Kessa, maintain our current heading until I give the signal. The 3 corvettes of Delta Squadron broke formation. To any observer it would look like a desperate, scattered retreat. The Krell responded exactly as Marcus predicted. Their fighter screen adjusted to pursue what appeared to be fleeing Pratha heavy cruisers. Maintained their triangle formation around the carrier. Everything moving with the mechanical precision of the hive mind. Coordination target locks achieved on all enemy fighters within range. Kessa reported, her voice held tension, but also growing confidence. Negative. Marcus said, hold fire and let them think we are running. He could sense Kessa's confusion through the data link. Every combat instinct said to shoot back when being pursued. Marcus saw the battle in 4 dimensions, not just the immediate moment, but the cascading consequences of every action. Grail fighters closed to optimal firing range. Bioplasma bursts began to flash past the corvette's hulls. One shot caught the shields of the 3rd corvette, causing energy to ripple across the defensive barrier shields at 80%. The pilot of that ship reported his name was Vex, and he sounded understandably nervous. Maintain course. Akuz instructed, trust the pattern. His eyes tracked the Krell heavy cruisers there. Point defense turrets were firing in coordinated bursts. The organic weapon systems pulsed with bioluminescent light as they charged and discharged. For 0.2 seconds. For 0.4 seconds. For 0.6 seconds now. Marcus said, all ships execute maneuver Delta 3 and full thrust toward the carrier. 3 corvettes changed direction so abruptly that the inertial dampener struggled to compensate. Exexa grunted as acceleration pushed her back into her seat. Pursuing Krell fighters overshot their targets. Their hive mind coordination was fast, but not fast enough to match the instantaneous decision-making of a Brett. Repper-enhanced human Marcus's hands moved across his console with blinding speed. He was not just inputting commands anymore. The neural interface meant he was thinking the instructions directly into the ship's computer system's weapons. Targeting locks appeared on his display faster than any organic pilot could achieve. Fire all forward batteries. Marcus commanded. The 3 corvettes unleashed coordinated volleys of plasma, fire, and kinetic missiles. A Krell fighter screen disintegrated under the precisely targeted assault. Each shot hit with perfect accuracy because Marcus was calculating trajectories that accounted for variables that normal pilots could not even perceive: relative velocity and enemy evasion, patterns in weapon travel time, and a dozen other factors, all processed in microseconds. The gap is approaching, Kessa said. Her hands gripped the controls so tightly that her knuckles showed white beneath her scales. I see it, Marcus replied. Through the sensor feeds he could perceive the point defense coverage from the Krell heavy cruisers, overlapping fields of fire that should have been impenetrable, but there, gap exactly where and when he knew it would appear. All ships follow my vector exactly, Marcus said. No deviation and no hesitation. He felt the other pilots lock onto his ship's position, their navigation computers slaving to his course. Corrections: 3 corvettes moving as one unified entity. The Krell heavy cruisers opened fire streams of bioplasma converged on the approaching coalition ships. The targeting was perfect as always, with hive mind coordination perfect but predictable. Marcus adjusted their course by 0.07 degrees. The plasma streams missed by meters. Another adjustment, 0.3 degrees starboard. More weapons. Fire passed through the space where the corvettes would have been if any normal pilot had been flying them. Impossible. Someone breathed over the command channel. Is dodging point defense fire from 3 capital ships simultaneously. Marcus barely registered the comment. His entire awareness had narrowed to the mathematical beauty of the tactical situation or jacarities in firing solutions and the precise timing needed to thread the needle. The gap appeared in the Krell defensive coverage. 4.7 seconds of opportunity. Marcus's ships were already in position. All vessels concentrate fire on the carrier launch bay. He ordered. Target coordinates transmitted in fire now. The 3 corvettes unleashed everything they had: every plasma cannon, every missile tube, every directed energy weapon. The combined firepower converged on a single point of the Krell carriers. Hold the exact location where the organic launch bay mechanism met the main structure, where the armor had to be flexible and therefore thinner. Carrier's bioluminescent hull rippled under the impact. For a moment it seemed like the organic armor would absorb the damage. Krell ships were designed to regenerate, to heal from wounds that would destroy conventional vessels. But Marcus had calculated the exact amount of force needed to overwhelm the regeneration capacity. The launch bay structure, buckled internal atmosphere vented into space, and a glowing cloud of frozen gases secondary. Explosions rippled through the carrier as stored fighters and ammunition detonated. The massive vessel began to list as its organic systems struggled to contain the catastrophic damage. Direct hit. Throke's voice held amazement. The carrier is crippled. Marcus was already adjusting for the next phase. The Krell heavy cruisers were breaking formation there. Hive mind was adapting to the unexpected assault, but adaptation took time, and time was something. Marcus controlled station defense platforms. Concentrate fire on heavy cruiser Delta. Marcus transmitted to Outpost Xerxes 9. I am sending you firing solutions now. The station's remaining turrets swiveled toward the target. Marcus had designated their weapons were inferior to capital ship armaments, but coordinated with precise targeting. Data: they did not need to be superior, just accurate. The heavy cruiser's shields collapsed under the combined assault from the station, and Delta Squadron, its organic hull, began to fragment as critical systems failed to enemy capital ships remaining. Kessa reported. She sounded breathless, with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. Marcus could feel the strain in his own enhanced systems. The neuromodifications allowed him to process incredible amounts of data, but they also generated enormous cognitive load. It felt like his brain was overheating, like his thoughts were moving through liquid fire. Marcus, your vitals are spiking, Kessa said with sudden concern. I am reading dangerous levels of neural activity. I am fine, Marcus said, though he could taste blood in his mouth. The Reaper modifications came with a price-enhanced performance, but at the cost of tremendous physical stress. All ships break and engage remaining cruisers from flanking positions. Marcus continued. The corvettes split formation, each taking a different attack vector. Remaining Krell ships tried to adjust, but their coordination was breaking down. The loss of the carrier had disrupted the hive mind's command structure. Marcus exploited every moment of their confusion. His tactical instructions flowed like water, always finding the weak points. Always. Staying one step ahead of enemy responses, Corvette rolled through a maneuver that brought them alongside one of the heavy cruiser's fire. Marcus' Sade point-blank plasma volleys tore into the cruiser's flank. The organic armor couldn't regenerate fast enough. The ship's hull split open like rotten fruit. Last cruiser is attempting to retreat. Vex reported negative. Marcus said, "Do not let it escape, and if it reaches the other Krell forces, it will bring back reinforcements." The 3 corvettes pursued the Krell cruiser was faster than the Coalition ships, but Marcus predicted its course corrections before they happened, cutting off escape vectors, hurting it like prey station platforms fire when ready. Marcus transmitted. The final enemy cruiser flew directly into the targeting solution. Marcus had created the station's weapons, caught it in a devastating crossfire. Ship's organic structure collapsed, its bioluminescent systems flickered and died, and then there was silence, the kind of silence that follows battles, when the weapons have cooled and the screaming has stopped. When survivors count the cost of staying alive, all enemy vessels destroyed or disabled. Throck said, his voice held awe. "Outpost Xerxes 9 is secure." Marcus leaned back in his seat, the neural interface disconnected with a sensation like cold water washing through his skull. His hands were shaking, blood dripped from his nose. "The modifications always extracted their price casualties?" He asked. "Minor damage to all 3 corvettes." Kessa reported no personnel losses from Delta Squadron, and station reports 43 injured but no deaths. 1,500 people alive because one human saw patterns that others missed. Marcus closed his eyes. The cost of being a Reaper was measured in more than just physical strain. It was measured in the weight of all the lives that the medical bay of Outpost Xerxes 9 smelled of disinfectant and the strange combination of atmospheres required by different species. Marcus sat on an examination table while a Quellan doctor named Siva ran diagnostics on his neural implants. Doctor's multiple hands moved with practiced efficiency, scanning and checking and making notes on a holographic display. "Your neural activity levels are still elevated," Siva said. Her tone carried professional concern. "Now, the modifications allow for incredible processing power, but they generate heat. That organic tissue was not designed to handle." Marcus nodded. He had heard variations of this warning from doctors for 5 years. The Reaper program had known from the beginning that the enhancements came with risks: cognitive overload, neural degradation, the possibility that one day his brain would simply burn out from the strain. "I will rest," Marcus said. "Of course you will," Siva replied with obvious skepticism. "Just as you rested after Barnard's Star, and after S. Proxima, and after all the other battles where you pushed your systems to the breaking point." She finished her scan and stepped back. "You are free to go, but I am recommending mandatory downtime, and your body needs to recover." Marcus slid off the examination table. His legs felt steady, despite the exhaustion that pulled at his bones outside. The medical bay, the station's corridors, were filled with activity. Repair crews worked to fix damage from the Krell attack mining. Personnel returned to their posts now that the danger had passed. Many of them stopped to stare as Marcus walked byward. It spread fast, the unremarkable human mercenary was actually Reaper Savina, a living legend who had saved them all from certain death. Marcus kept his eyes forward and his pace steady. He made his way back to the docking bay where Delta Squadron's 3 corvettes were birth tray pair drones swarmed over the ships, patching hull damage and replacing burned-out systems inside. Corvette Kessa was running post-combat diagnostics. She looked up when Marcus entered. "The command channel has been active for 3 hours. "Kessa," said Coalition High. "Command wants a full report, and our sector admiral wants to speak with you directly and someone from human military." "Intelligence has been trying to reach you. I am sure they have," Marcus said quietly. He sat at his station and began reviewing the damage reports. "They want to know how you survived Barnard's Star." Kessa continued, They want to know why you faked your death, and they want to know what you have been doing for the past 3 years. Marcus did not look up from his console. I did not fake my death, he said. The reports filed after Barnard's Star were accurate as far as Coalition Command knew, and I was listed as killed in action because that is what everyone believed. Kessa's tail swished with agitation. Then how did you survive? Marcus was quiet for several seconds outside the viewport. He could see the asteroid field stretching into the darkness rocks. In ice and the silence of space, a civilian freighter captain named Rodriguez disobeyed evacuation orders. Marcus said finally he stayed behind because he thought he could help, and when the station started to break apart, he found me in the wreckage. The memories came back unbidden. Rodriguez's weathered face, visible through the viewport of his ships. Airlock the emergency transfer through hard vacuum, though. Pain of injuries that should have killed him. Rodriguez got me to an unmarked medical facility. Marcus continued somewhere off the official records, and I spent 8 months in recovery. 8 months, Kessa repeated. And then what? And then Human Military Command came to visit. Marcus said they told me the war had turned, and the Reaper program was being dissolved, and they offered me a choice. He finally looked at Kessa, met her eyes directly. They said I could accept a medical discharge and a new identity and a generous pension. Marcus said, or I could stay in service in some official capacity, and they were very clear that the official capacity would mean desk work and advisory roles and public appearances. You chose neither, Kessa said. It was not a question I chose to keep fighting. Marcus confirmed, but I could not do it as Reaper 7, and that designation carried too much weight and too many expectations. He turned back to his console, so I waited until the medical facility cleared me, and then I used contacts to create a new identity, and 6 months ago, I enlisted under the name Marcus Chen, and I requested assignment to Frontier Protection Details because I knew they would be the least likely to attract attention. You wanted to be unremarkable. Kessa said slowly, I wanted to be useful. Marcus corrected, there is a difference. The door to the Corvette opened. Ethrak entered, followed by the rest of Delta Squadron. All 17 members crowded into the small space, the Vrex commander's expression. Was serious the Coalition reinforcement fleet arrived 2 hours ago? Throck said the Admiral is conducting an investigation into how a small mercenary squadron defeated a Krell battle group that should have overwhelmed us. We followed standard tactical doctrine. Marcus said he kept his tone neutral. There is nothing standard about what happened here. Throck replied, you killed or disabled 15 enemy vessels with only 3 corvettes and no casualties. Rax, the Quellan quartermaster, pushed forward. The same being who had given Marcus's damaged armor now looked at him with something approaching reverence. The Admiral wants you transferred to a frontline combat unit. Rax said they want to assign you to strategic operations where your abilities can be fully utilized. Marcus had known this was coming the moment he revealed his identity. The path forward had been set there. There's no going back to anonymity. I am declining the transfer. Marcus said quietly. Several members of the squadron spoke at once, protests and questions overlapping. Raised a clawed hand for silence. Explain. The commander said. Marcus stood. He looked at the faces around him, these beings who had mocked him weeks ago, who had given him the worst assignments and outdated equipment, who had treated him like an inexperienced recruit. I joined Delta Squadron because I wanted to serve alongside people who did not care about my designation. Marcus said I wanted to be part of a team that valued contribution over reputation. He gestured at the Corvette around them. This ship and this squadron and this mission are exactly where I want to be, and frontier protection may not be glamorous, but it matters, and the people we saved today matter, but you could do so much more. Kessa protested. Your abilities are wasted on routine patrols, are they? Marcus asked. Today we saved 1,500 lives. And how many lives would I save in a strategic operations unit? Thousands, Throck said. Immediately, maybe tens of thousands, maybe. Marcus acknowledged, or maybe I would spend my time in planning sessions and briefings while the actual fighting was done by others in the Reaper program. It taught me how to be a tactical asset, but it did not teach me how to be a symbol. He sat back down at his console. I am a soldier. Marcus said, not a propaganda tool and not a strategic weapon to be deployed when Coalition Command decides the optics are right, and I am just someone who happens to see patterns clearly and wants to use that ability to help the squadron was Silent Vex, the pilot who had flown the third corvette, spoke up. The Admiral will not accept your refusal. Vex said they will order you to transfer, then I will resign my commission. Marcus said simply, the Coalition cannot force me to serve in a capacity I do not choose. You would walk away. Brock asked. The Vrex commander's tone held disbelief. You would abandon the war effort because you do not want to follow orders? I would walk away from assignments that turn me into something I am not. Marcus corrected, but I will not abandon the war, and that is why I am asking you to support my decision to remain with Delta Squadron. He looked directly at Throck Commander. You have the authority to request that your unit remain intact, Marcus said. You can tell the Admiral that removing me from Delta Squadron would damage unit cohesion and reduce operational effectiveness. That would be true, Kessa said quietly. After today's battle, our squadron has proven capability beyond standard mercenary units. Throck was silent for a long moment. Vrex Commander's scaled face showed the internal struggle. Finally, he nodded. I will speak to the Admiral. Throck said, I cannot guarantee success, but I will argue that Delta Squadron has earned the right to maintain its current composition. Relief flooded through Marcus, not certainty, but hope. Thank you, Commander. Do not thank me yet, Throck replied. And understand that if you remain with us, everything will be different now. The commander gestured at the other squadron members. These people know who you are and what you can do, and you cannot ask them to forget that Marcus Noded he had accepted. That truth, the moment he spoke his designation aloud, I do not ask them to forget. Marcus said, I ask them to remember that abilities are tools, and tools are only as valuable as the purpose they serve. He looked around at the assembled faces. I am Reaper 7. Marcus said, that is true, and I have modifications that make me effective in combat, but I am also Marcus Chen, and I am also just another member of Delta Squadron who wants to do his job well. Rax stepped forward. The Quellen's multiple arms gestured in what Marcus had learned was a sign of respect. You asked for standard armor when you arrived. Rax said, I gave you damaged equipment because I thought humans were soft-worlders who did not deserve better.